My chocolate dump cake with cake mix and instant pudding is easy and delicious. This simple recipe has just 4 base ingredients, but if you add a few more, you can elevate this dessert from good to great. Let's go over the ingredients. For a 9 by 13 baking dish, which is already buttered, you will need one 15.25 ounce box of chocolate cake mix. I'm using Devil's Food, but you can use triple chocolate, regular chocolate, whatever you want. One small 3.9 ounce box of instant chocolate pudding. You can use regular chocolate, chocolate fudge. I'm using regular, but like I said, whatever you want. 1.5 cups of milk. I'm using whole milk, but you can use 2%, 1%, probably even skim. And the fourth ingredient is 1 stick of unsalted butter, 113 grams, which I'm going to melt in the microwave. Like I said, you can definitely make this chocolate dump cake with just 4 ingredients, but if you want to take it to the next level, I would recommend adding somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 teaspoon of salt just to balance out all the flavors. 1 teaspoon of instant coffee. That's really going to bring out the chocolate flavor, so I highly recommend it. But if you absolutely hate coffee, then you can add some molasses. 1 teaspoon of molasses. That will help the chocolate flavor too. And last but not least, 1 12-ounce bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Some bags nowadays are 10 ounces, that's fine. If you prefer milk chocolate, you could use that too. I'm going to start the recipe by melting the stick of butter in the microwave, and then we'll get to making the cake. Now that my butter is melted, I'm just going to pour it into the baking dish. There are a few chunks that didn't melt totally, but that's okay because like I said, this recipe is forgiving. So I'm just gonna spread them out like this. Now that the butter is in the baking dish, I'm gonna pour in the dry ingredients. I'm gonna start with the instant chocolate pudding. Honestly, it probably doesn't matter. I'm going to sprinkle it in as evenly as possible. And like I said, this recipe is easy, it's forgiving. Like you saw, not all of the butter melted completely, but it'll be fine. The one thing that you do want to keep in mind when making this recipe is that you do not want to add hot butter, so the melted butter, to the milk, because that might curdle the milk. So that's why it's best to melt the butter, pour it into the baking dish, then add the dry ingredients, because that's going to help cool everything down. Now for the cake mix, pour over like this. Like I said, you want to try and get as even as possible by moving the bag back and forth as you shake gently. Nice and quick and easy. And optionally, the instant coffee. Like I said, you do not have to add this, but I highly recommend a little bit of coffee because it's really going to accentuate the chocolate flavor. And I'm going to do a sprinkle of salt. We'll call this 1/8 of a teaspoon.
If you want to take a minute or two and smooth out the dry ingredients, like what I do with the cake mix before I add butter in my other dump cake recipes, you definitely can. But honestly, since you're going to add milk and you have to mix everything together, I honestly don't think that this step is necessary.
Now that the butter and dry ingredients are in the baking dish, it's time for the milk. I'm just going to try and pour over my 1.5 cups of milk as evenly as possible. trying to not get it on the counter. And I actually use powdered milk, so that's why there's a bit of residue. Like I said, you can use whatever you have on hand. And now that all the ingredients are in the baking dish, take a fork or a spoon and stir everything together. I know some people might say, Chef Parnell, this is not a dump cake if you have to stir. But we don't have to stir in a different pan. We are stirring everything together in one pan. So that's what makes this easy. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just stir to combine. If you really wanted to, you could mix everything in a separate bowl, but then you'd have to wash something else. So I think one of the benefits of a dump cake is that they're supposed to be easier. You don't have to dirty a lot of dishes. With this cake, we're mixing it in the same dish that we're going to bake it and serve it in. So I think it's still a dump cake. I am going to continue to mix everything together, then I'll bring you back. After stirring for a minute or two, my dump cake batter came together. Now I'm just taking my fork and I'm trying to even it out. I tasted the batter, it tastes really good. Another benefit of this chocolate dump cake recipe is that it does not use eggs. So if you cannot have eggs or you don't have eggs on hand, you can still make this. And since there are no eggs, you can taste the batter, no problem. I tasted it, it's very good. The coffee really helps to bring out that chocolate flavor. Now, the chocolate chips. Like I said, a 12-ounce bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips. This is optional, but I think it's going to be a nice touch. If you want them to be inside of the cake and not on top, then you can definitely add them earlier in the recipe. I would add them when you add the milk. But if you just want them on top, you can definitely add them now. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is going to bake uncovered. I will let you know for how long. I just pulled my chocolate dump cake out of the oven. It was at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for 35 minutes. This smelled incredible while it was baking. My whole place smelled like chocolate. I can't wait to dig in.
At first sight, I thought my chocolate dump cake turned out really well. Because of that deep, rich color and the chocolate chips on top, I thought it looked absolutely perfect. A chocoholic's dream come true. And when I took my first bite, I knew that my easy 4-ingredient chocolate dump cake recipe with cake mix and instant pudding was a success and it was delicious, but I prefer other types of chocolate cake. Honestly, I think the best thing about this dump cake recipe is that it's super easy and there's minimal cleanup. All you have to do is dump the ingredients into the 9x13 baking dish, mix them together, sprinkle some chocolate chips on top, and then you're done. As I said earlier in the video, the only thing you really have to be careful about is curdling the milk, so that's why I recommend melting the butter, pouring it into the dish, then adding the dry ingredients, and then finally the milk. Although you could just wait for the butter to cool down and then add it to the dry ingredients at the same time that you add the milk, I think that first pouring in the melted butter and then adding the dry ingredients to bring down the temperature of the butter is the safest way to do it. I also liked how this dump cake looked. It had a deep, rich chocolate color, and with the chocolate chips on top, there was no mistaking what this was. And now that I'm holding a piece up close, you can see that it was moist inside. This cake was not dry at all. And it did have a really strong chocolate flavor because of the chocolate pudding, the chocolate cake mix, the chocolate chips, and in my opinion, the teaspoon of instant coffee is what really helped to bring out the chocolate flavor. So I highly recommend adding it. Maybe I'm being overly critical. Most people will love this because it's easy and it has a ton of chocolate flavor. However, if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that I have a chocolate cake with peanut butter cream cheese frosting that I absolutely love, and that is still my #1 chocolate cake recipe. I also think that maybe the reason why I didn't like this cake was because it didn't have any eggs. Don't get me wrong, this was definitely good, but for some reason I felt like there was something missing in the background, and the only thing I could think of that it might have been would be eggs. But with a slight drizzle of caramel or a scoop of vanilla ice cream, this chocolate dump cake definitely tasted more complete. But for only 4 ingredients, if you don't add the extras and not having to wash extra pans, most people will say that this chocolate dump cake recipe is a big success. One thing I did want to talk about briefly is the fact that you do have to mix the batter. So some people might say that this isn't truly a dump cake if you have to mix the ingredients after they're in the 9x13 baking dish. I actually did consider trying to bake this dump cake without mixing the ingredients together to make it more like a true dump cake. I thought about it, but then I realized that there is no cake recipe that I'm aware of that does not call for mixing the ingredients together. I think that mixing or agitating everything together is probably necessary. In short, I was definitely pleased with how my 4 ingredient chocolate dump cake recipe with cake mix and pudding turned out. It was easy to make, it would be good for a crowd, and most people will love this. However, as a chef, I have to tell you, I still prefer my chocolate cake with peanut butter cream cheese frosting, and just in general, I think there are other chocolate cakes that are better. But once again, for something easy, something for Valentine's Day, a holiday, and you need to feed a lot of people, this is it. This would be a good chocolate cake. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.